3 different curveball questions and how we'd handle and tackle them ourselves.
This is the B2B Performance Marketing Podcast by Webmarketer, here to help you make the right moves with your B2B advertising. No spin, no smoke and mirrors, just honest insights from the advertising front line. Welcome back. Today, we're going to try a slightly different format of episodes, and we genuinely love to hear what you think about it. We're going to set 3 curveball questions that come up in performance marketing quite a bit, and then we're going to contextualize them into kind of what they mean and also run through how we would handle them. Now, these are all questions that we've had from smart marketers, usually when things are going really, really well. So it doesn't necessarily mean that anything's wrong. It just means that there are some knowledge gaps to work through. All of these curveball questions will tie into one specific theme, and today's theme is lead attribution in the real world. So let's get started with the first one. We've increased ad spend and more leads are coming through, but they're showing us from other sources in the CRM, not from ads. What's going on here? Maelien, did you want to head this one up and contextualize and kind of talk through how you would handle this?
So that's a great question, and it's actually a question that we come up against quite often. The issue that we often see here is when you're looking at your CRM, you've only got 1 or 2 bits of data, and that is typically going to be the last session source. But in some cases, like with HubSpot, it will also be the first session source. So what you're missing out on here is everything that happens in between what someone does first and what they do last. So say, for example, they came and they saw you in an event, and then they interacted with a number of different ads in the very middle of the journey. And then at the end, they searched your brand name and they came in directly. Well, in your CRM, it would look like it was an event and a brand, but you wouldn't get any pictures around what happened with the ads here. So how we like to treat this usually is that it needs to be looked at as a data story rather than just trying to paint a picture from one place like your CRM. So really what you should be doing here is looking at your CRM for your first touch session and then also for the last touch session as well. And contextualize that with your ad platforms. And these should be set up to be capturing conversions like calls, form fills, everything like that. So then you can see, okay, so I'm seeing that there's been an increase in the number of calls and the number of form fills. And you might be able to get other things then as well. Like, actually, we're not having a look at what's happening on the calls and attributing them back to sources. And you might find all of a sudden that you can get a better picture there with your ad data as well. More so, you should then be able to paint a picture of, right, I can see what's going on here. We've clearly had more form fills going on. We've had more people filling out the contact us. It's just that with the events that we're doing and the high level of brand that we've got, that these are soaking up a lot of that picture. But we can see that ad spend is working because it's increasing in these other areas like direct, like for events.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And even when you're impressing the first point that someone got in touch, you don't know if something else has happened offline to trigger that as well. So we have to remember that we can only deal with the stuff that happened as online interactions. The other thing that I'd like to highlight as well is that technology doesn't work 100% of the time. So obviously there's things like consent mode, like whether or not the script that you're using to populate hidden fields gets printed in the CRM, for lack of a better word, and loads of other things that could mean that the data, the source data, isn't actually showing up properly in the CRM as well. And it also kind of talks about how people use the internet and how they kind of discover and decide on getting in touch with a company as well. So for example, like Maelien said there, someone could go to an event and have a positive interaction. They could go about their business and forget about it for a little while, see an ad, be reminded of it, and then go through to organic search, type the company name in and inquire that way. So the data in your CRM isn't always 100% representative of the user journey, basically. Okay, so on to the next curveball, which is, why do the numbers from 3 months ago look different now compared to what they were in the end of month report at the time? Do you want to kick this one off again, Maelien?
Yeah, sure. So I think when you're looking at 3 months ago and the data's changed, generally there's one main reason here, and that is to do with attribution windows. Now, if you're marketing in B2B, then these attribution windows, unless you've stuck with the default, are generally a lot longer than you'd typically deal with, just because you know that that sales cycle from first touch point to turning into a customer takes so much longer. So it's not untypical for those to be at the very least 30 days, but generally 60 or 90-day attribution windows. So that 3-month question actually fits perfectly with that 90-day window. And what I'd say here is that perhaps someone interacted with an ad 90 days ago or within that 90-day window, and since then they have converted. What's going to happen here is, Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, whatever it is that you're using here is clever enough to be able to grab that first interaction and associate it with their conversion recently. So say if they filled out a contact us or a form on your website, they'd link that back to that click that happened 90 days ago. And that's going to happen all over the board here. So whereas you might have reported a couple of days after the month ends, well, a long time's gone past then. A lot of people have been clicking, and a lot of people have, like in the last story, maybe seen more stuff from you organically with ads, maybe been to an event, and since then converted. Well, that's going to get attributed back to within that 90-day window.
So yeah, with ad platforms, they typically don't report on conversions that happened at the time of the conversion. They report on what happened at the time of the click, which can often make it difficult to kind of match conversions in the CRM to what happened in the ad platforms. And going back to what you were saying, Maelien, around when a monthly report is sent, that actually has a huge impact on how accurate the data is. So you talked about how attribution windows can affect the data, and that's absolutely true. And the other thing to bear in mind is around data lag. So basically every ad platform, and sometimes even different channels within those ad platforms, take a bit of time to process the conversion data and send it back at the report level. So, for example, if you've run a Performance Max campaign before, you've probably seen that colored strip underneath the timeline chart, where if you hover over it, it's going to say something like, it will take 14 days to process your conversions. What that means is that if monthly reports are being sent, less than 14 days after the end of the month, well, there's still conversions that are going to be processed into that report, potentially. And this idea of a data lag isn't just a Google thing. It's also present across other ad platforms too. So again, there's not really a fix, there's just a consideration. Your data in your reports will change over time, and that's just something that happens. It's just something we have to remember. And as agencies, we have to make sure that we communicate. The main thing is that you remember what your attribution window settings are, and that you also appreciate there's going to be a lag in the conversion data being processed into the reports.
Okay, so the next question that we've got is, your reports are saying 50 conversions, but when we look at the CRM, it's only showing 30 leads. What's happening here? Where's the difference? Louis, how would you answer this?
Yeah, so this one comes down to definitions and language. So for example, when I'm talking around this kind of thing, I really like to think about who I'm speaking to and what their domain expertise is. If they've got solid foundational performance marketing knowledge, then I know I'm comfortable just to use, the usual terms, and that's going to make sense. But if their domain of expertise is slightly different, if they're focused on a different area, the words that I use might mean something completely different. So I've got to focus really hard on putting my insights in a way that mirrors the language of the person that I'm speaking to. Because a conversion to me is basically a valuable action, someone that did something valuable after seeing an ad. But to someone else, a conversion could mean a closed sale. So I have to be mindful of these kind of different distinctions. And Maelien, I think you kind of talked about earlier how you can have different types of conversions. So, lead form submissions, phone calls that last for more than 60 seconds, lead magnet downloads, and all of those kind of things. One approach that I really like to take here is to break out all of the different conversion types in a report. So if I'm going to say the campaigns generated 50 conversions, well, I also want to say 30 of those were lead form submissions, 15 were phone calls, and 5 of them were lead magnet downloads. And that really helps provide some clarity around those numbers and avoids causing that confusion around the disconnect between I'm saying 50 conversions and the CRM is saying 30 leads.
I really want to unpack what you said here in terms of calls, because I see this is one grey area, especially around this question, that just happens again and again. So sometimes, say we take Google Ads here, because that's one that drives a lot of calls, you can see a real difference in the number of calls versus what's actually being attributed in the CRM. In fact, sometimes you can see that basically none of those calls are showing against Google Ads in the CRM. And when you think about the quality of conversations that you can have on a call and the likelihood of them turning into a customer, there's a real disconnect here in terms of how that translates to actual people turning into customers eventually. And so asking this question can unlock those insights. For example, we work with one client, and when we were looking at their Google Ads, they had about 5 times more calls versus any other conversions. And when we looked at their CRM, they had no calls that were attributing to their Google Ads. And so there's a real disconnect here. And we decided something needed to be done about it. And so we got call attribution software in place, specifically CallRail here. And all of a sudden, their call tracking was working way better. And inside their CRM, we could see the calls that were happening from Google. It didn't fix it completely, but that channel went from looking like it was breaking even to being their most profitable channel. So exploring these gaps can be hugely powerful.
Yeah, 100%. It's almost like sometimes we think as inbound calls as a channel in itself, but actually something usually had to happen to trigger that call being made. So, couldn't agree more there, Maelien. Having that source data from the call in the CRM, it's just a no-brainer, and it's really important. I think it's something that's missed quite a lot.
Yeah, it definitely is. And jumping back to your response on this question a minute ago, I also want to unpack conversions here. So you said there might be a disconnect versus what we call conversions versus the person that we're talking to. And I actually think that's really important, because when you're thinking about platforms like LinkedIn, Facebook, and Google, you really want to give them as much data as possible to go and find the right people to get more people that are likely to turn into customers. In an ideal world, we would just give them purchase data. But generally, especially in B2B, there's just not enough data there, and it means that they just won't work. So what conversions means to us is feeding it the right signals to show that this is the type of person that is likely to turn into a customer. That means high intent form fills, contact us forms from high intent campaigns, those calls that are really valuable. And all of those are what we're calling conversions when it comes to the platforms.
And I think as well, the same could be said as if you were just going to track, lead form submissions, to actual inquiries. If you missed all the other stuff, like the phone calls, like lead magnet downloads and things like that, you're only going to be given the ad platform's very small segment of data. Yes, it's going to be the best quality data, but it might not be enough to make decisions on. So what we really want to be doing is giving signals back to the ad platforms to basically say, go and find us more people like this. And the more data you can feed back, the more effective it can be to turn that into actual inquiries in the short term.
So there you go, 3 different curveball questions and how we'd handle and tackle them ourselves. If you like this type of episode and you have curveball questions of your own, then head to webmarketeruk.com/topic and send them over. We'd love to hear them. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.